a creative professional working with clients and peers, I often find myself in a loop, constantly typing out feedback on multiple devices and tools. Discovering Pacto has allowed me to eliminate typed feedback and instantly send a recorded video with my action items. With Pacto, I can easily review videos, websites, images, 3D files, and audio files. My feedback can then be sent as a link with clear action items faster than any other tool out there. Pacto has changed my daily lifestyle. I now have more time than ever to do what I love most.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Super exciting day for me here. I'm speaking with probably one of the best humans I've ever met. Amazing friend, Cisco Guzman. The idea here is just to hear thoughts and very authentic points of view on what we're trying to do. And we are hyper focused on creativity and how we can maximize human creativity, especially in the era of AI. So this conversation will be very, very insightful. So I'd like to start with maybe Cisco, can you introduce yourself, maybe a little bit of your background and why you're so good at humans?
Hmm. Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Um, and if I look a little tired, it's because I was awake most of the night because you had told me what you wanted to talk about, and my brain I couldn't turn it off the whole
No
time.
problem.
The whole night I kept thinking about creativity and humans and where it comes from and all that stuff. Anyway, yeah. Well, I guess what I would say is that when I was in college, I decided to major in something that people didn't understand. I majored in feminist studies, which is an interdisciplinary degree in lots of things: philosophy, social sciences, art, history. And so I've kind of been an interdisciplinary thinker, I think, my whole life pretty much, and which is why I ended up building products and working with you at Adobe and, working to um, try to synthesize lots of different perspectives in order to solve problems for human beings. During that process of like learning about products, I taught myself how to design. So I used to work at the music department at school, and I had access to a computer there for the first time. It was 1991. There was a Mac Quadra sitting on my desktop, and my job was to answer the phones. And so I remember sitting there like bored out of my skull, and saw this little icon on the desktop that said Photoshop 1.0, and I was like, "What's that?"
Hmm.
So that double click changed my entire life because it started a process of diving into my own head and then using tools to externalize what's in my head. Whether it's me building a strategy deck for a product that I work in, I'm telling a story. If I'm doing my collage artwork and my poetry on my weekends, I it's like I'm constantly making stuff, I guess what I'm saying. So, I don't think I'm unique in that way. I think a lot of people do that. And that's a part of why I'm so excited about what Pacto is doing is that I'm really interested in tools that are specifically built for people that make things. Because the process, let me say it this way: we're human beings making things for humans with other humans. That is a really, really complex process in which everyone wants to put something into the system that is going to create, and everyone wants to get something out of it. And all of that all of that requires, I think, tools that are built for us. Like, you wouldn't try a good example. You wouldn't try doing vector artwork in Photoshop. you would do it in Illustrator or, Figma.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of how I feel about the Pacto's kind of approach to communication, which I think is really interesting.
That's amazing to hear. Yeah, I worked with Cisco back in 2015. We were kind of the first souls there in the XD era in the product team. I remember I met Cisco in London. We went to this long work trip there, and we're meeting customers that were very, very passionate about Sketch. Figma was not a thing yet, remember? And I remember how you were able to communicate what we were doing in such a like a powerful way, like
Mm.
the way you were able to express yourself there, converting the audience. It's not like you didn't become competitive. You were like you were shifting the atmosphere like in the room in a way that I've never seen before. And at the end, people are like, "Oh, how can I start? How can I do this? How can I use this?" And you did that multiple times. So how do you go with this? I'm trying to kind of decipher your mind a little bit. How do you
Hmm.
go with this idea of, okay, because we're building things for humans, how can I first do something that I don't know what you do, but like what is the kind of steps that you take to, you have a goal, you want to take people to point B, right? But what's your strategy there in maximizing your expressiveness?
Mm. That's a really good question. I think the first and most important thing, which I think is the foundation of my communication style, at least, and the way that I proceed into the world, is to be authentic. So, for those that are listening, Damien was talking about a situation in which we were building this product that basically could draw rectangles, and so we were way behind in the market, but we were a stupendously gifted group of, you know, um, full-hearted people working together. It was an amazing experience. But the thing that we were doing was walking into these agencies and these customer meetings, and people were like, "Sketch, you're never gonna beat them. Like, you're never gonna," and they were just kinda laughing us out of the room a little bit. And I think one of the things that I tried to do at the very beginning of those, like, meetings and that communication is to basically say, "You know what? If Sketch works for you, keep working. Keep using it." Because the bottom line is that I have been on a production line before. I know what it's like to have to create print-ready files by the end of a day. I know I've spent hours under a hood color correcting images in Photoshop. Like, my tools are set up to do what I want them to do, and if you try to tell me to mess with my workflow, like, we're gonna have some problems. So, I think that that is the first part of communication, is establishing, a platform on which you are showing up and being honest. I don't expect you to adopt XD today. What I want you to do is to give us a chance to show you what we're doing and what our approach is to building the product and to building features, just because I think you'll think it's interesting. As a designer, I think you'll be really interested in how we're having these conversations. And so that was our approach, right? To just be like, "Hey, we're just like showing up here." And then in year 2, when we would go back to those same customers, what we found was that they were a little more curious. People that before were laughing us out of the room were like, "I'm still not gonna use it, but I like what you did with auto animate," or, "I like what you did with symbols. That's pretty cool." And then they would kinda give us a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and then go back to Sketch. And then by year 3, we had people switching, and they would tell us things like, "I never thought I would switch." So in that communication, I guess what I'm trying to say, and in those conversations, we did what I think is at the heart of really good communication, which is to understand that creative people need to get a job done. Creativity as a business, as a commercial enterprise, has a process to it, and there's a sanctity to that, that someone's livelihood is connected to, their way of expressing themselves is connected to it, and you have to honor that. So that's what we did at the beginning of those conversations, and that's why I think people felt heard and felt like they weren't having something shoved down their throats, is that we honored their work.
Their craft, right? Like the care
That's
of
it.
that work. Yeah, no, that's
That's
so
it.
true, so true. Uh, you've been through many different, I would say, phases of creativity, right? I remember you mentioned you did magazines and InDesign and all those, like even before InDesign, right? Like, and then you went to like Photoshop and all the UI that got developed with XD and everything. Now, 2025, maybe 2 years into this new era where creativity has a lot more tools. There's AI behind there to kind of boost what people can experiment and all that. But at the same time, we see a ton of unknowns, right? There's a lot of challenges. We did that work with POD and Coca-Cola. um, a lot of the work became fine tuning the output, like fixing things, and same thing with other companies. There's a lot of post production work that's needed. How do you see that evolution from like the early days of print and magazines and all that, and now AI? How big is this shift for creativity in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, that's the million billion dollar question that everyone keeps talking about, right? And I'm gonna admit wholeheartedly that I do not, and I don't want to be dismissive of the concern, but like I don't personally feel an anxiety as a creative person around AI. Of course, I don't have a lot of content published out there. So, I don't want to be dismissive of those perspectives, because on that it goes back to what we were talking about before. Respecting the craft means understanding that like your livelihood is attached to these artifacts that you create, and if they're being harvested. So I'm going to take that whole part of the conversation and kind of hold it over here and say that conversation still needs to be had around protecting content and content authenticity and ownership, and using models ethically to harvest, I mean, unethically to harvest people's work. That's something that needs to be talked about, and safeguarded against. But just purely speaking, as like a pixel vector kind of sound moving image making kind of person, I'm like, I'm in heaven. Because I'll give you a really, really just a small example, but it's very powerful. When you were looking for stock photography before, you would spend hours, hours looking for an image that you thought was really good. You'd pop it into your layout, you would download the watermark. It would be like, 280 pixels. So it's like your thing looks really gross. It makes your layout look ugly, so you buy the image. You're like, I'll pay 199, 299, whatever for it. So you drop the image in, multiply that by 40 images across a magazine or a brochure or whatever. You take it to the customer, and the customer is like, yeah, I don't really like any of the photography. And you're like, great. So I just spent all this time picking out images. Then I wanted to make them look better because I didn't want to give you the, cruddy, watermarked one. Where did all that time go? I just turned single-handedly turned this job into an unprofitable venture. So what I do now is like I have a whole workflow for myself that's built on AI. I know what to go to Leonardo for. I know what to go to Firefly for. I know what to use Midjourney for. I have a tab open for every single one. Then I have Project Neo from Adobe Open, which I use to create structural references in 3D. Um, and what I do now is I create my own images that exactly communicate what I'm trying to do. So that whole comping zone at the very beginning, whether it's a logo or a layout or anything, I'm actually able to just do it so much faster now by throwing in a prompt, even if the image isn't perfect. The fact that it's communicating the idea that I have here means that I'm not spending hours looking for a stock image which communicates my idea well enough. And it usually doesn't do a very good job. Most of the stock photography that I buy now is AI based. Like Adobe has a whole category of like
Yeah,
AI
yeah,
generated stuff. That's mostly what I end up buying because it's more expressive. So
yeah.
I think there's still a place for photography, obviously. Like there's a warmth and a depth there that I don't that I think you lose when you're using AI. But for certain it, applications, AI works perfectly fine, especially in places where I used to lose money.
Yeah, no,
Another an,
go ahead, go ahead.
another good example, this is a really powerful one, and I bring it up because you brought it up in post-production. If there was an image of like, a scene and I didn't like the cropping, right? Because you're looking at the edges and it just doesn't fit in my layout. I actually want to zoom it out. I would have spent days sometimes recreating edges of that image, sampling, cloning, doing lots of stuff, compositing to extend the image. Now it takes me like literally 10 seconds. I just go into Photoshop, I do generative expand. It allows me to become profitable in
That's
in the
so
early
amazing.
stages of creativity.
That's so amazing. I think there's being a creative professional now, meaning that you're gonna sell your work, right? You're gonna get paid to do that work. It's kind of nuts, right? Because think of it. One thing is expressing your thoughts into something that's tangible, right? So you spend a lot of energy and experimentation there. Another thing is to do that to satisfy someone else, like an external stakeholder, a brand, a customer. Creativity is freaking subjective and hard, right? Like getting that process nailed is really hard. Why do you think some people can get that thought out in a better, easier way than others? And why some of them can sell that more in your opinion? Like how can they transfer their create like that simulation that they ran in their brain that they picked to the world and to the external stakeholder? How do you see that process, and any opportunities to improve that?
It's a really, really great question. I think I want to go back to something that happened in the early days when I bought this book. It was called the Haydn Manual to Print Publishing. It was this black book. I think a lot of designers, if you're listening, you'll know which one I'm talking about. There was a lightning bolt on the cover. It had a nice varnish on it. I remember loving this book, but what I loved about it the most is that it was like a book that saved my life many times because it was almost like a little encyclopedia where you could look up the problem that you were having and then go to the page and be like, okay, here's how to do this thing. So the woman who told me to buy that book was a designer. She was in her late 50s. I was in my 20s. She was in her late 50s, so she had been a designer for like 3 decades. She had been, cutting out things with her X-Acto knives and putting them, onto pages, like doing, stuff the old-fashioned way, right? And she said to me when I told her that I was running around trying to start my design agency, but I didn't know if I was doing it right. And I felt like I kept hitting communication issues, and I felt like customers wanted things, but I had to read their minds, and then they weren't paying me for half of the work. It was just all this like all these shenanigans. And she said to me, "You need to do two things. The first is go get that book, the Hyde Manual, because you need something that will just tell you how to solve your problems." She was like, "That's it." She said, "And the second thing you need to do is you need to adopt a design process, which is a narrowing funnel. Every design process that is profitable is has three stages to it. The first stage is concept, the second is layout, and the third is refinement. They're called rounds. Do you design in 3 rounds, give an estimate for 3 rounds, and if the customer wants to go more than 3 rounds, then essentially what you do is you charge them for the extra rounds. Otherwise, you're not making any money." She said, "So think of a boat going down a canal. A canal is built in bodies of water, as I understand it, that are not wide enough for boats to turn around in. So usually the only way through is through, right? And you progress in the canal because water is exchanged between the different locks and the different sections of the canal. But you don't go backwards, as I understand it. I think you just go in one direction." And that's what she was trying to say, and for engineers, I'm sorry if I butchered that, but what she was trying to do was explain to me that what you're trying to do in design is to have a conversation that's very high level at the beginning, that's conceptual, that sets up worlds. So when you hear your customer's problem and you're solutioning, give them 3 worlds. Give them a world that's radical, give them one that's safe, and give them one that blends the two. So it was a very formulaic approach. She said, and then get them to approve one of the worlds. And when you're done approving one of the worlds, keep that slide, circle it, and put it in your back pocket and show it to them at the next meeting. So you kick off that meeting with an agreement of where you had kind of gone through. Then you show them a layout of the work that you're creating for them. This is where you give them, and she said, give them 3 options. One really well developed, and the other two are kind of like, oh, if you want us to go in this other direction, we'll give you. And then once they look at the layouts and they like where they've headed, with like they pick a direction, you circle it and you say, okay, so this is the world we're in, and this is the layout you want. Now I want you to go write copy for it and generate everything for it. In other words, what she was really trying to say is that if your stakeholders, here's what can break the process. Let's say you were in the meeting that told me that we were going to go with world number 1, but you have a stakeholder who wasn't in the meeting, and when you tell me to go do world number 1, you then talk to that person, the CEO, they look at stuff and they're like, yeah, I kind of like world number 2. So much of what happens, I think, that breaks down the process of communicating around creativity is not having the right stakeholders involved, not having a process that is a narrowing process that goes from concept, shows clear levels of alignment and agreement at every lock, like that boat going through the canal, so that you can say the next tranche of work is sanctioned. We are like, we are not going to have a bunch of throwaway work because there's alignment along the way. So anyway, like tools that help
I
you to
like that.
capture that essence of what people are saying is so vital, because sometimes people can't be in meetings. So sometimes now with technology the way that it is, you just send a video. You're like, here. But then the question is, how do you make sense of it? Documents, like text messages, like all this stuff, all these tools that we have become these extra channels for feedback, and then it just gets so hard to manage all of it. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement there.
That's amazing. It's almost like one side has hypotheses, the other side has expectations, right? And these things
Yes.
are in different spectrums, like almost like in the extreme and the beginning there, right? So you go through multiple rounds to align these two spectrums, right? So it's a very chaotic, very subjective process, right? So creativity is very, very based on alignment. Uh, do you think that, and this is something that we truly believe on Pacto, is the idea of that initial spark, that initial imagination, that first simulation that's out, that's created. Oh, I want to do this, I want to do that. That like the willingness to do something or to go after something, that initial trigger, that initial spark is uniquely human. Do you think that's true, or is it something that AI will eventually do too? Like it will decide to do things out of nowhere.
This is the question that kept me up all night. So that is like I kept thinking about like, is creativity uniquely human? And I guess in order to answer that question, this is making me kind of flex my old philosophy muscles. But you'd have to define, what creativity is, right? And I struggled with that all night long. My brain just kept turning over and over and over again. What is creativity? At first, I thought, oh, maybe it's resourcefulness. And then I thought, no, resourcefulness is really about it's a side of creativity, but it speaks to someone's craftiness in the face of constraints. Then I thought about beavers building dams, and I thought, well, they're resourceful. They're solving problems with intent. Is that design? Are they designing their homes in a certain way? Then I started to look at where I arrived once I kind of tossed around all these many ideas. It occurs to me that creativity is not so much an action, but a state or a place for me personally. In other words, I could try to philosophize about what it is that makes me creative versus, a beaver or, um, a cat that does something ingenious, right? Seemingly ingenious. But really, my own experience of creativity is an emotional state. Yes, I'm making something, but emotionally and spiritually, I feel freedom. I feel integration between my chakras. My head and my heart are aligned in unison. I feel a connection to something greater than myself.
Purpose.
I feel a sense of purpose. I feel connection to other human beings. A really good example is like when I make a book of poetry and I share it with others and they see it and they connect with it. So I think what I'm really trying to say is I'm personally less able to speak about what creativity is and whether it's uniquely human and whether machines will one day be able to replicate it because I'm not afraid of losing the part of creativity that really matters to me, which is it's my expression of myself and my authorship. I'm still able to do that with AI tools. And even if AI were to be able to generate an entire commercial by itself, that wouldn't stop me from doing what I want to do. So my experience in my body is going to be the same. Because if you give me 2 popsicle sticks and a pack of gum, I'll make you a tower. That's what creativity to me is. It's in your body. You're doing it with your body. It's a visceral process, and it's something that I do because of how it makes me feel and what it does to my brain. It's like a healthy drug.
No, that's amazing. Yeah, it's very addictive, right? Like it's when back to the very beginning when you were mentioning that we are humans working with other humans to creating things for humans, right? A lot of the learnings that we have with Pacto now is that that process of creating something that will trigger emotions on the other person, right? So we are humans with all these senses that you mentioned, like sight, hearing, smell. Like we can activate those senses to create emotions. Now we want to create the same or similar emotions in other people. um, and one of the biggest learnings that we have is that conveying your message, being truth, being clear is very important in this process, right? So when you want to share your thoughts on something, when you want to explain something, when you want to express your thought, bringing emotion in that process is extremely important, especially with the end goal of activating those senses in humans. Um, but now, today, the way pretty much every creative exchange feedback, if they're not in person, face to face, is via text, right? So what we're trying to do that to solve with Pacto is this: how can we maximize the power there for you to be expressive, right? To really capture your emotion, your visual signs, your verbal signs, your excitement, your frustration. One thing that we heard the other day is like a very famous creative director was like, when I have to give feedback, I'm already angry. I'm already frustrated because that doesn't look like what I want, right? Like, so people already go there, and the tools that they have today is really okay. You have to go here and type your feedback. You need to compress all that emotion, all that frustration into text, right? And text is very efficient in a lot of ways, but not for carrying creative emotion and feedback, right? So, do you see that AI will know and learn how to navigate that idea of activating senses, translating messages in a way that will activate senses on the other side? Do you think AI will be able to do that?
It's a great question. You are full of great questions today. I'll sort of respond this way. Sufjan Stevens, the musician, has a song that he titled, I think one of the lyrics, or, yeah, it's one of the lyrics, says, "Words are futile devices." Words, I'm going back to the study that I did of, the structuralists, the linguists. I think it was like Ferdinand de Saussure was like breaking down language and talking about how language was a system of like referent and, reference. So, and the terms I'm going to mess up because it's been 30 years. So, everybody give me a break. But basically what he was saying was the word tree relates to a physical object in the physical world, which we know you and I have both seen trees, and we were both taught through school and through our cultural systems that like the word tree is affixed to this real object in the physical world. So it is actually safe to say, right, that words are good at communicating certain types of concepts. Like this is a cup. There's not a lot of ambiguity there. And the systems have been set up so that we understand what we are talking about, what the word refers to. The problem is that once the complexity of the idea increases, words begin to be very poor carriers of nuance. In fact, let's just go back into, and again, I could be wrong, like all of this, old Stanford education might be a little rusty, but I'm thinking back to the history of language. If I'm not mistaken, words came from pictures. The first thing that we did was to draw pictures. The reason we drew pictures on cave walls was because we were trying to tell a story to either somebody else that we thought might find the cave drawing. That's why some of the oldest languages that I know of anyway, like Aztec, the Aztec languages, Mayan languages, like Egyptian, like their writing looks like pictures.
Like drawings, yeah.
They look like drawings. Don't you find that really interesting? In other words, our own instinct as we developed was to basically write down things in pictures. We draw. That's what we like doing. That's how we communicate our ideas naturally. And it's our natural state to want to do that. Then those pictures turned into words. Then the Romans came along and decided everyone was going to have the language. It's like we did what we were going to do. So essentially, what I'm really trying to say is that what I like about Pacto and AI is that it's returning us to our natural state.
Nice.
It's returning us back to a place where the primacy of the idea itself and the story, what I am saying to you, Pacto is recording me, giving you feedback on this comp that you just sent me. Instead of having me translate it into text,
Hoping.
either a document, and then hoping that you understand. And then on top of that, I'm spending time to make sure that I don't hurt your feelings, because that guy who said that he's already frustrated, well, he can't be frustrated because someone's not going to want to do their work, if they get frustrated. So I think that the opportunity there, to bring it back around, is the opportunity is to use, I think, AI to help surface useful things. I go back to like protecting the time of the creative. If you record a Pacto, that's great, right? Because it's already an improvement over me reading a long-winded email with four other people, you know. But what would be really useful is if there was sentiment analysis that specifically scans the video feedback that you just gave me, and then I can just forward to the places where there are action items and there's sentiment analysis telling me, like, Damien is really into this part, he isn't into this part. That's all the information that I need. So if we can save time for creative people by using machine learning to eliminate the places where we are basically not being profitable. Because, and I'll wrap up this thought by saying this, even though creatives and designers and artists are not, even if you don't have your own agency, you're still having to be profitable. You still have people coming up to you expecting you to make things overnight, and you're the one that's working on the weekends. You're the one that's giving up your family time to do work that is not doable because it's not feasible. It doesn't fit into the time that you have. And I think that if we could have a communication tool that eliminated meetings, that eliminated misunderstandings, comps that never should have been made to begin with, that helps me to zero in on what feedback people are giving me, that even blends people's videos together to give me one list of things that I like, that would have been my dream 20 years
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah, I remember one of your obsessions when we worked together. I remember very clearly was the idea of evolving the process to create more alignment. I think alignment was something that you fought your entire career on. Like, and do you think that's utopia, or it will eventually be possible to kind of optimize and uh, get to like this alignment of, again, hypotheses and expectations in a way that works better?
Oh, we're going to get there. I may not be around to see it, but we're definitely going to get there. I think a lot of people don't realize that. I think a lot of people, when they think about building products and designing, they think of a conveyor belt, like something has to happen. First, you do, you know, whatever. It can be the design thinking process, or it can be whatever process. I think people think that things go in a certain order, when in reality, it's more of a dialectic. Like Marx and Hegel talked about the dialectic of enlightenment, which drove human consciousness forward and upward, because there were these punctuated moments of conflict and that between parties that would essentially force you know all of society essentially to move from tribalism to feudalism and finally to capitalism. So we know from we have an understanding that history works that way. So if you look at the progression of a project, a creative project or a product, that's what we're doing. We're just moving upward and forward in iteration. We're using customer experience and conversations to help us disprove our own hypotheses, not validate them. And then once we come to the realization that we're missing something, or that a new conversation gives us a new layer of understanding, we collectively move forward. That process happens no matter what you are building. I've built shampoos, I've built ads, I've built software, I built perfumes, you name it, I've built it. And what I have seen is that the process for creating anything is kind of the same as it is for creating the next thing. So I think what I'm really trying to say is that the tools of the future, the tools that help you build products and be creative, are not going to be list managers like your Asana and your Jira. They're going to be communication tools that take all of those inputs, help you to aggregate the inputs and turn them into actionable insights that you then use. Like, those tools are gone in 10 years, in my opinion, or at least I want them to be gone.
No, that's very true. I remember if you show Photoshop to a new student today, like a young person, they would be like, "What is this?" Like that, I don't know where to start. It's
Yes.
very like you see all the controls at once. There's no progressive disclosure. Um, but we're getting close to the end here. How do you see creative agencies, creative professionals, video professionals, designers, developers? How do you see their work or their process 5 years from now, 10 years from now, given all the shifts that we have? Like we're seeing a lot of momentum in agents now. Like you can now have your minions doing things for you, like buying stuff and even like visiting websites and doing research and all that. That's going to be more and more visible and real. How do you see creativity 5, 10 years from now?
I think that in 5 years, we will have um, a new workflow that we have yet to imagine, which allows you to slice and dice using artificial intelligence in a way that basically we need a new Photoshop Figma for that is bespoke for AI workflows. I have created my own But every day when I restart my computer, I have to open up all the tabs that I have created for myself. Then I open up Figma so I can do vector work in it. And then I open up, so I basically just have like 6 tools. And I think that eventually designers are going to have a suite of products that allow them, like, I'll give you a really small example, and I know we're almost at time, but I'll give you a really good example. A part of the problem when you're inputting a prompt into, a Gen AI product is that you don't get anything that looks remotely like what you want. But I have had luck getting what I want from the system. And it's because I go into Adobe Neo, and using these 3D shapes, I create a structural reference of what I have in my head. Then I take the download JPEG, drop it into the generator, and then I give it a description of what I want. So I think what I'm trying to say is the minute that creating structural references as an input for what AI gives you is a part of what's built into the studio, it's because right now it's more like a slot machine. And so I think what needs to happen in 5 and 10 years is that the tooling moves away from being this random slot machine to more like, let me shape or sketch or show you with shapes what I'm picturing, and then you give me back something.
And at the same time, your context will grow, right? Like over time, over the next couple of years, your do's and don'ts will be richer and more well defined, right? So it will be more calibrated for your needs
Yes.
moving forward. And do you think that would be one of the things that we believe now, especially in the era of AI? If we have Coke and Pepsi using AI, only AI to build creative pieces, creative artifacts, they'll eventually, because it will optimize everything, will end up in the same very similar place, right? Because it's going to be optimized for clicks, optimized for conversion and all that. And creatively, it will be pretty much the same thing. Um, do you think that creativity, authenticity can be a differentiator for this chaos that we're in right now?
Mm. Well, I think that humans are irreplaceable, is my belief, because I've already proven that for myself. Like, I learned AI tools and it just gives me back more time. It literally allows me to be more profitable. So I think what I would say is that I think there's an opportunity for us to shift what we think a designer is, and to differentiate ourselves as a profession, not based on what we do, but on our problem solving, which I think is actually the tension in design organizations, right? Is that people think of you as like, oh, can you throw together a screen? And you're like, that's not what we do. We do a lot more. So I see AI as an answer for that, which allows design organizations to differentiate by saying, you know what? All that comping at the beginning, we have AI do it until we figure out what world you want to be in, what concept, because now I don't have to generate the concepts. Before, I would have had to completely do them by myself. It's almost like use AI to fill in the parts where you've been wasting your time, which only creates resentment, and lack of profitability. So I do think it's going to be a differentiator.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you so much, my friend. And to close this, I would love to ask you one last thing. If you have a message for that creative that's very concerned, the illustrator, I don't know, the photographer, anyone that's really like feeling like this this AI thing as a threat, do you have a message for them? I think we'll all agree we're very optimistic with AI, right? Do you have a human closing message for these people to really like empower them, to calm them down,
Mm.
like anything to give them more tools? I would say more almost like an advice for them to navigate this challenge?
Well, I mean, I would start by acknowledging that those feelings are there and saying they're valid, and we are right to be skeptical. Like, humans don't have a great track record necessarily of like doing amazing things with technology. I think we do some amazing things and then others are kind of questionable. So you're right to have the skepticism, and don't let me take that from you, because that's your agency and your individuality and yourself. But what I would say is, if it weren't for designers and creative people, the world would be lost. It really would be. Like, our way of thinking, our way of life, and our craft is a part of what drives human evolution forward. We shape what technology ends up looking like. So I want all the best brains and the biggest hearts out there to be in the game, shaping what this is going to become. And I want them not sacrificing their time anymore. Because I'm sick of being in a craft where I'm expected to work for nothing. And I think that AI has the potential to actually make our lives livable and to have life work balance. So that to me is mostly what I would say. Like, yeah, that's what I would say.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, my friend. Thank you so much for all your thoughts. Thanks for being a great advisor to Pacto since the very beginning, being a part of our journey. Yeah, I'll see you around, and thanks again.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I created Pacto so you can get back quality time and do what matters most. When you use Pacto, you eliminate the need to type out your feedback or waste time trying to find previous comments. Instead, you can record yourself instantly, mark up your content directly, and send a recording with clear action items so nothing gets lost in translation. Review videos, websites, images, 3D files, or audio files faster than any other tool out there.